Well, good morning.
I did my undergrad at Oxford, but I was a material scientist, so I did a lot of
Late night last evening with all the Bollywood dancing.
And then
Yeah.
went to Stanford.
Well, our grand keynote speaker today is a trailblazer with a capital T.
Thank you.
I first met Sarah Friar when we served together on the Stanford Business School Management Board.
The furthest away.
She was the CFO of Square, and Sarah, in her role, was at the heart of economic empowerment as they enabled
Total pleasure.
people across the world to accept payments anywhere and everywhere and anytime. Under her leadership, Square launched their initial public offering, and the market cap increased by over 30 billion. Okay? 30 billion. Well, she went from that super high impact role to another super high impact role. She's currently the CEO of Nextdoor, the beloved platform that lets us connect to neighborhoods that matters most to us. Sarah is on the boards of Walmart. You know, a lot of people write on their LinkedIn, Fortune 500 board director, Fortune 100 board director. Well, Sarah is Fortune 1 with Walmart. And she's also on the board of ConsenSys, that's unlocking the power of Web3 across the world. Especially relevant to have her do the opening keynote today as we lead up into the must-watch, must-attend Web3 and Metaverse track at 10 a.m. today. Sarah has been recognized with the second highest recognition, the OBE from the British Empire, for her contributions to entrepreneurship, and that is so relevant for us at TiE, given our mission of fostering entrepreneurship. And beyond all of that, I've seen firsthand how Sarah really uplifts everyone around her, and there are people who would follow her to the very end of the earth. So with that, she is going to be in conversation with Chris Davis. Chris consults Fortune 500 executives on the intersection of technology and strategy. And so let us welcome Chris Davis and Sarah Friar.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this exciting talk. The theme of the conference is Dream, Believe, Achieve. So what we want to unpack today is, how do you go through that journey? When you look at LinkedIn or someone's personal persona, their profile, it's extremely easy to be almost intimidated. Almost say, this is unattainable. How does somebody do that? And we have Sarah Friar, and when you get to know Sarah, what you'll understand is it starts with humility. It comes from a real place of knowing who you are as a person, and everything else falls from there. So Sarah, first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us at TiEcon. And I want to start with your personal journey. When people see that you're the CEO of a major Silicon Valley company, they might immediately say, oh, this happened by either wild chance or someone gifted it to you. But that's not quite the narrative. And I would love for you to bring us back to where it all started with your upbringing, and then talk us through the journey to where we are today.
Sure. Although I think in everything, I totally subscribe to there's an element of luck in everything, but luck is preparation meets opportunity. So as entrepreneurs, you all already know that. I grew up in Northern Ireland, like probably many folks in the room. I emigrated to the US in 1998, which to age myself. But to create a little arc, I grew up during the Troubles. I was actually just back in Northern Ireland 2 weeks ago for the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreements, when peace came to Northern Ireland. And it was a very reflective moment. The conference I was at was titled Reflect, a day to look back, Renew, a day to recommit to peace, and then reimagine. Northern Ireland now has this amazing ability to potentially, I call it, become the Singapore of Europe, because we have a foot in both camps. But I was thinking about, how did that all happen? So I grew up in this border village, not even town, but community was at the soul of it.
Yeah.
Now, from there, talk a lot about my leadership journey being, number one, really stay true to your principles. It's amazing when you know what you stand for, you can't help but be authentic. and I think people really follow you. And we need leaders right now that want to do the right thing, not just the popular thing. So I think from a principles perspective, I learned a lot in that Northern Irish upbringing about hard work, entrepreneurship, but also this power of community. From there, many hops, skips, and jumps, but I think I've always been very curious, I would tug the thread. Like, why did I go work at McKinsey? Because you can be just endlessly curious and get paid for it, which is awesome. Why, when I went into finance, did I end up in equity research? It's actually what brought me to Silicon Valley. It's what brought me, I know I've attended TiEcon before, I don't know when, but a lot of it was the curiosity of learning about new technologies, and frankly, learning about the people who were driving it. And then finally kind of recognizing I wanted to be this operator and ending up in companies. And I've never taken the straight path. I love the feeling. I talk about getting adrenaline rush every day. I think you should take risks, whether it's living in other countries. I worked in South Africa. Whether it's taking that job that no one else kind of wants, but figuring out why it could be really special. And then back to community, just that big arc, having done a fintech startup, so started at Square when we were 200 people, took it ultimately to 3,500 people, $30 billion of market cap, and then I kind of decided to start it all again. Went to Nextdoor, 200 people, there's the theme, but community. So that arc came back to me, and I think being able to do the thing you're really passionate about in life, you are so lucky when you can find that zone, the thing you're passionate about, the thing you're good at, the thing the world needs, and then the thing you can get paid for. Otherwise, it's just a hobby. And that, to me, is what's brought me back to Nextdoor.
I love that. And if you look at your career arc, you've gone from studying and researching and reporting on different companies at Goldman, and then at Salesforce, you're at a behemoth. At Square, a fast-growing, you could argue now a behemoth, and then you went back and did it all over again. And you took on increasing levels of responsibility, CFO at Square and CEO now at Nextdoor. And I wonder for the audience, I'm sure a lot of people have done that as well. They were in big corporate, they had a meaningful job, a stable life, family, income, and then all of a sudden they said, I want to be a founder, I want to be an entrepreneur because I'm a dreamer, because I'm crazy, I believe in something and I have a conviction. What drove you to that decision for Nextdoor? Why Nextdoor? Because I'm sure you had other opportunities.
Yeah, it's, first of all, everyone in the audience is doing this. You know you're slightly crazy. Definitely, I recognize that in myself. But I think with Nextdoor, what happened is I knew I had like a next big act in me. I wanted to do something that I felt mattered in the world. As I went through my career, I definitely started to understand how when you can find this passion for something that matters, it gets more and more important. When I worked for Mark Benioff at Salesforce, here's what I always appreciate about Mark. For him, he had turned it into a crusade. It wasn't about cloud-based computing. It was literally about, there's a reason why he uses Star Wars everywhere. Like, you were the Force, right? That's why it's Salesforce. When I got to Square, Jack could easily have said, hey, we're all in the business of making points of sale. Like, what 12-year-old ever woke up and said, when I grow up, I want to build a point of sale. Can't wait, right? Said no, young person ever. What he said is, our company is about economic empowerment. And that was something I felt like I can, no matter what kicks me down, I can get back on my feet and go after that because I am fighting on behalf of all those amazing small local businesses that really are getting kind of screwed in the world. They can't accept payments the way they should be able to. When Nextdoor came, it almost got easier because Nextdoor was founded on the premise that we've lost social connectivity. The founders actually read a Pew Institute survey that said something like 50% of Americans only knew one neighbor. And yet, when I go around the world and I ask anyone, talk to me a little bit about your childhood, what was your neighborhood like? Everyone talks about all the neighbors they knew and how they played in the street and they had their bikes and everyone has this story almost no matter what country they grew up in. And yet we've lost that social connectivity, and it's really doing some terrible things to our society, right? The Surgeon General was just out on Tuesday talking about the loneliness epidemic. The fact that it's the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes, not having any social connection. We've done some research at Nextdoor that says knowing 6 or more neighbors, 6 is the magic number, actually really changes your whole health. It takes away feelings of social isolation, but it just overall improves your health. And think how many times you go to the doctor, right, and they prescribe things like don't smoke, do 10,000 steps, eat your greens. If only they also said no 6 neighbors. The pandemic gave us a look at that, but I think we all need to keep relearning this. So going back to Nextdoor was easy. It was about purpose, about something that mattered in the world, and frankly, it was also about being a female leader. We're going to talk in a bit about a nonprofit I started called Ladies Who Launch. I sit on stages like this a lot and tell women, go for it, take the risk. And there I was kind of unsure, should I take the risk? And so it's super sad. Women just surpassed men with the name of John in the S&P 500 as CEOs.
Oh, gosh.
That's pathetic. I think 2% of the population is called John. As far as I know, 50% of the population are women. And even when you look at things like VC funding, only 2% of VC funding in 2021 went to all women-founded teams. Now, if you get a man on your team, that number skyrockets to 17%. Wow. But there's something wrong in the system if that's what the output is.
And Sarah, I want to sort of press on this trajectory of Salesforce to Square to Nextdoor, because you've seen how large operates. And at the same time, when you go to a company that's hundreds of people rather than thousands of people, you have to take what worked, but you have to tailor it to your new environment. So can you share with the founders and the entrepreneurs in the room, what are some of the leadership lessons that you brought, you've called them your CEO rituals, of how you build teams at that level? Especially because you also, through the pandemic, you went through your own version of hypergrowth. You serve incredibly diverse audiences, and so you've talked about the importance of building diverse teams. And so you have this really interesting 3 dynamics of hypergrowth, needing to be diverse, and make sure that you're building a structure that can help you scale.
Yeah. I mean, today Nextdoor is 80 million neighbors on the platform across 11 countries. In the pandemic, we literally saw, when the kind of true lockdown came into place, our DAU doubled in like a day, wow, which was incredible. You talk a big game about being built on flexible architectures. I was very glad at that point that it actually worked. We stayed up, but people were pulling all-nighters, and that goes back to purpose. The reason why I love purpose-driven companies is people will work hard for you, but when it's purpose-driven, they'll run through a wall for you. So back to kind of CEO principles, my number 1 leadership mantra is always people first. Get your people right, everything else just tends to work itself out. So in terms of just ideas for all of you sitting in the audience, and of course, you'll create your own mosaic in life, things I do. Number 1, I really try to make sure I focus on all my people things first thing in the morning. I'm a super morning person. I was a rower in college. I love nothing better than getting up at 5 a.m. That's when I'm at my best and brightest, and that's when I put right at the top of my to-do list. I see a lot of people in life, particularly young managers, they get into something, they know they need to hire, and hire always ends up being the last thing they do at the end of the day. And then a quarter in, 2 quarters in, they can't understand why they can't get out of the kind of hamster wheel that they're on. And it's put their people first. Second thing I do around the people as a CEO, so I try to lead with maximum transparency. So for example, I call it the love letter. I write an email to my team every weekend. It actually started when I was an analyst at Goldman, because I realized when I go talk to investors, I would send lots of research reports out, like the very formal stuff. But they would say, oh, you were at TiEcon this week. Like, what did you hear in the hallways? And so I created an email called the Frequent Friar. I was that funny. And I've just written it ever since. I don't call it the Frequent Friar anymore. I think my whole team would die. I know my kids would die if they thought I did that. But I do write an email every weekend, which is just a little pulse of what I've seen that's interesting. It's a place where I try to get customers in front of them too. Like I love a young tech workforce, but they can walk inside the walls of a company, or in this case, the walls of their bedroom, wherever they're working from these days, and they can really forget the human. And so reminding them of our customers all day, every day, I view as like one of my most important things as a leader. And in fact, I do my own roundtables even to this day. Every couple of weeks, I have a roundtable of neighbors. It might not seem scalable, right, when you're trying to learn the habits of 80 million people, meeting 4 or 5 every 2 weeks, but it builds up, right? Over the course of my last 4 years, you see a lot of similar themes coming through. Skip level meetings, we talked about in the hallway. So there's, of course, your leadership team that you're working with, but I actually try to do a lot of skip levels because it gives me a pulse of what's happening through the organization. As a leader, you want to make sure you haven't created kind of a cement block of what you're being told is happening versus what's actually happening.
Yep.
It also helps me coach and mentor my leadership team because I get a lot of kind of 360 feedback for them all the time. And it's a way to hug tight the total superstars in your organization. I have a group, every so often, I love my people team, but they try to fix it for me. They want to turn it into something hierarchical, like all of the M5 should be in this group. I'm like, nope, CEO prerogative. I pick people who I see as curious, might be literally the person that's just walked out of, they're an intern, but if they're curious, they're asking a lot of questions, and I think they're creating kind of interesting moments. I pull that team together about every month, and I actually give them work, but it's usually work, like for example, our engagement survey said people wanted more recognition. So I handed it back to that group and said, rock on, like, give me some ideas.
Yeah, come up with your own ideas.
And so it's a really good way to create a feeling that we're all building.
Yeah,
if you're in an organization and everyone thinks that you are somehow going to tell them what to do, we're all lost.
Yeah.
Do not have that happen. So those are just some examples, but leading with transparency, number one, and then leading with deep empathy, like really walk in the shoes of your customers to every extent that you can.
So before becoming the CEO of Nextdoor, you had a deep career in finance. You looked at the markets, you assessed other companies, you most recently were the CFO of Square. So you spent a lot of time thinking about how do I best position myself with investors, whether it's public or private markets. Now we're in an era where the market has shifted, where valuations are not necessarily solely on growth and engagement, and there's an urgency or an expectation around profitability. How should founders be thinking about preparing for that? Because it's not necessarily the right thing for everybody in their growth trajectory. But when do you know you have to start preparing for that? How do you cross that chasm? How do you create the right cultural things, especially with flashy benefits that you don't feel like you're clawing back the snacks just to get profitable? How do you build it right from the get-go?
Yeah, so to begin with, having your North Star, I hope all of you that are sitting there that are building companies, you have to have a vision of what it looks like. So I just redid in August, pretty turbulent in my market. Nextdoor, our growth continues to be really strong in terms of neighbors to the platform, but our monetization is through ads, which if you've been watching the ad market, it's been like the frozen ad market for the last 12 months. So in August, I could see this tendency of people starting to manage things in smaller and smaller chunks. Because when you get anxious, people suddenly are like, what are we getting done today? Not even like next week. And do we need to take snacks out of the kitchen? And you'll have these ridiculous kind of Dilbert-esque meetings about stuff like that. None of which is helping your customer, nor is it going to drive long-term value truly for your company. So I actually pulled my team together and said, we're going to do a 5-year strategy, which might have seemed kind of crazy in a world of kind of needing to short-term move, but it's been great because it really helped them think longer term, aspire, because right now you need to hold your employees tight, so they have to believe it's worth it. But there's also short-term decisions you are going to have to make, but you want to make sure you're thinking through the long-term ramification of that short-term decision. What I experienced in a market of being an equity analyst, investors are kind of fickle. They probably wouldn't want me to say that out loud. They probably would disagree with me. But the thing they want in the moment is often driven by like a 90-day cycle. Now you can't ignore your investors. They're an incredibly important part of your stakeholder group, particularly if you're not profitable and you might run out of money because you need them. So hold them tight, bring them in, make them feel part of this total mission that you're on. But I would really kind of coach anyone who's working with me in kind of a leadership role to really help me think through what 5 years is a lot for a startup. Like at Square, we did more 2 to 3 year planning in the early days. Nextdoor is we're a public company. We have a lot of money on our balance sheet. We can think in 5-year terms. We have product market fit. But I would try to push the aperture a little bigger of where you're headed, and then shrink it down to, we use quarterly OKRs to drive. And then the final thing is, if you're getting anxious on that front, whether it's with your investors, with employers, go back to output, not input. So you have to be super clear. I spend a lot of time on goal setting at the beginning of every period. I'm a huge fan of Andy Grove's Score Takes Care of Itself, right? That's the Andy Grove book. The one he talks all about OKRs. Because I think if you set the direction and tell people what they're accountable for, then you have to get out of their way. And it's actually incredibly important for diverse workforces, because you don't know how your workforce can best manage. If you have an amazing VP, but she has 2 young kids, and she needs to make sure that they are fed, watered, put into school, and maybe she needs to go pick them up at 4 o'clock, but she's the person on the clock at midnight, you cannot mandate when she's working in that case. Like when I joined Square, I had someone senior who was super anxious about the fact that we weren't all drinking smoothies at 9 p.m. That was actually his way of deciding if Square was working. I took him to one side and I was like, what are you worried about? And we walked it through and we said, what are the metrics that would matter? We went deep, we set those metrics, and then we gave up on the frickin' smoothie thing and the getting people to work on Sunday afternoons if it didn't work for them.
Right.
And so you have to say output is what matters, but the how, you gotta let people be their creative self, be their diverse self, and again, it goes back to getting your people right.
I think through a lot of your story, you're striking this balance between structure, creating clarity of path for people so that they know how to step in, and sort of removing some of the uncertainty, while at the same time giving empowerment, autonomy, celebrating diverse teams, building diverse teams who serve diverse communities, who get diverse perspectives, and then trusting those people to be smart, great, loyal servants to the company and build on behalf of the customer. And I want to sort of shift gears here as we start to wrap up. Later today, we're going to have 2 tracks. One on AI, generative AI is at the top of the hype cycle right now. Another on Web3. And you could argue with FTX that blockchain and so at least the crypto aspect of blockchain is at the bottom, the trough of the hype cycle. And you have a unique purview into both. For AI on Tuesday, Nextdoor had an interesting announcement about your assistant. And there's a board that you sit on where companies using blockchain for really interesting, compelling, right here, right now use cases. And Sarah, would love for you to talk about both of those.
Yeah, I mean, it is so interesting. Going back to the fickleness, right? We all live in these hype cycles. So first on generative AI, I mean, AI we've all been using for maybe decades in some case, but certainly in the last couple of years, the use of data, right? We use it intimately at Nextdoor. We're a very big data platform, 80 million people, very active every single day, as you can imagine. We have an incredible local knowledge graph. And so we use it for things like how to get the right notification to the right person at the right time. That's what creates amazing engagement on the platform. We're literally best in class from an engagement standpoint. But generative AI, when ChatGPT launched formally in November, it feels like 2004, right? Remember when we suddenly had mobile? Everyone's done their generative AI thing now. We all had mobile apps. All we'd done was take our desktop app and put it like on a bad form factor and said we were mobile. So I think we're very early. What I do look for is how would someone be successful here. When I think about Nextdoor, I'm definitely talking my own book, but we have a local knowledge graph that's very differentiated. I actually have a lot of already pre-labeled data. So 80 million neighbors label data every day because they label it as something for sale. They label it as content that needs moderation. They label it as a lost and found item. So it makes it very powerful as we use it in these large language models. The other piece is generative. I'm in the business of UGC, user-generated content. So it's just so natural to deploy it into our system.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is we have an assistant that as you write a post, it will say, hey, I could maybe make this post better for you. So it regenerates the post based on our data to say this will get more engagement, but it's a choice. You can decide to use it or not. We're also using it in a place around keeping the content vital, where if we know you're writing a post that's probably going to get moderated, which AI is already scoring it, today we stop you in your tracks. We use a lot of behavioral science. We use a kindness reminder. But we're still leaving it up to you to edit. And a lot of people don't know how to be super constructive, right? Back to Northern Ireland, we wanted to kill each other around a table. The idea we got to peace is kind of phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so giving the constructive push was key. On the ConsenSys side, which is the board I sit, which is Web3, what I'm hearing a lot of in the industry right now is provenance, this word. Like, how do we know that if there is content generated, it was Sarah, it was her face, it was truly her talking? How do you know I'm not a bot sitting up here right now? How do you know it was my content? How do you know it's my speech? And so on. We see it in micro ways, like when you call your bank. More and more we can't rely on just a voice approval. But is there a way to use blockchain? Right? Clearly, it's an amazing technology for being able to kind of stamp something, watermark it in the moment, and have an element of irrefutability about it. Smarter minds than mine are going to figure out how to bring those things together. But I think that might be a moment for crypto tech, not crypto money, but crypto tech, to find that aha use case. It's happening in supply chains already. It's happening in particularly drug supply chains, like anything that has a lot of value. Yeah. It's just not the cool, sexy chat GPT moment yet, but I'm certainly not giving up on it. I do think that this kind of community-based building, I think Nextdoor is interesting from a Web3 perspective, because maybe the community is the neighborhood. Like, why shouldn't neighborhoods benefit from everything about their neighborhood that makes it amazing? And today they don't really get a chance to do that. So I've spent a lot of time trying to brainstorm on how we bring Web3 into the company as well. Love that.
And Sarah, we're right at time, but I don't want to leave the stage before at least talking about Ladies Who Launch. Can you just give us the short version of the organization that you founded, why you founded it, and at least how people can find out more?
Yeah, absolutely. So this falls under I kind of talked a little bit leadership principles, right? So number one, true to your value. Number two, be curious. And number three, like, don't forget the joy and the passion. And so for me, being able to pay it forward was helping co-found Ladies Who Launch, it is a pun, for really more women on Main Street. It came from my days at Square, so it is the cupcake maker, the person maybe creating health and wellness, usually comes from their lived experience. But the thing I found is those women do not get access to three things. Number one, community. It's actually why I love TiEcon, because you all know what it's like to walk into a room and see no one like yourself. The second thing they don't get access to is education. It's really hard. There's a whole mishmash. Probably in the US, the SBA does a decent job, but we can all do a better job of helping those women get to the resources that they need. And it's not just the kind of academic. Often it's much more about the feeling, the emotion behind things like asking for money. And then finally, inspiration. Like, they need that moment where they can look at someone and say, okay, if they did it, I can do it. And usually the inspiration is not the moment you stood on top of the mountain and planted the flag. Often it's like when you were in the total chasm of death, and you were like, I'm never going to get out of this. This is awful. Retelling that story, but explaining how you did pick yourself up and keep going. That's often I find where women really, find the connection moment, find the inspiration moment. So we try to really get great examples in front of them. It's been such a joy, and so that's why I definitely leave you on this note of you're all in a position where you can pay it forward, but the kind of dirty secret is when you do that, just the joy that it creates for you is a big part of what will create your resilience as entrepreneurs, as founders, and as people who really can change the world.
Well, Sarah, this has been a fantastic conversation, and if I could summarize it, be human, create some structure as you scale, and pay it forward. Please join me in thanking Sarah.